We're heading back to the Boiling Isles today for another episode of the Owl House. This is Sense and Insensitivity, an episode that up until about halfway through I was 100% sure I hadn't seen before. And then I started remembering stuff. Because I remembered thinking, I think it was a couple episodes back, when King takes advantage of the fact that Eda's curse is going out of control a little bit and sicks her on some kids. Some of you guys were saying in the comments that you really don't like when King acts this way. That you feel like he takes things too far when he does this. And I just kept thinking, I know there's an episode coming up where he kind of learns his lesson, right? I'm going to wait to talk about that kind of thing until we get to that specific episode. And this is that specific episode. I just didn't realize it until partway through the story. So that was good. It was good to get to that. And we're not far off from that incident actually happening, which I think is entirely on purpose, because in this episode, King is very usy towards one of his friends and takes advantage of them for his own purposes. And I feel like it was on purpose that was placed so close to another time that King was very usy towards one of his friends and took advantage of them for his own purposes. And then has to learn that that's a bad thing the second time. Probably not the second time. He's probably done it before. In fact, if I thought about it, he's probably done it before in the series itself. As per usual, the episode is broken into an A plot and a B plot. One plot focuses more on Luz and King by extension as well, while the other one focuses more on Eda. And while I definitely feel like the Eda plot in this one definitely had the more interesting individual moments, I still found the Luz and King plot in this one a little more entertaining overall. First of all, I do like this trend of King being bounced back and forth between Luz and Eda's plots to whichever one of them he supplements the most. I think that's a really clever use for his character. And I also thought it was really neat that he took over Luz's plot a little bit here. It ends up being his plot by the end, but it starts out as a Luz plot, and she ends up saving the day in the end, at least up to a point. So it really does feel like he hijacks her plot for a while here, which makes sense, because it's all about him hijacking one of her stories, making it more rough and tumble and violent, and then selling it to a publisher, stealing her dream of being a published author. And it's fantastic. It's one of those kinds of plots where you have to experience it to get the full effect. But first of all, they keep calling him Mr. King once he's a famous author, which felt very much like they were taking stabs at Stephen King, just like poking little bits of fun at him. Not like in any kind of malicious way, but you've got King wandering around soaking up the limelight, and then you have like Stephen King puts himself in like every one of his movies and stuff, right? You get what I'm saying. Just a little bit of lighthearted poking. No, not that kind of poking, get your mind out of the gutter. And in fact, this entire plotline, the highlight of it was that it poked fun at a lot of writing tropes and a lot of like industry standards and stuff. Like the villain literally puts them in a box that will crunch them over time if they don't get the next book out on time, making a clear commentary on crunch time culture. In fact, Luz calls that kind of thing out as toxic straight up in the dialogue. But then there's also some very realistic scenes of them trying to collaborate over the story and each bringing their own ideas to the table and each wanting to focus on their own thing when crafting the story going forward. And King's lesson in this episode doesn't specifically center around him having to learn not to use his friends. Like, that's kind of what comes out of it. But the specific lesson is that he has to realize that his friends are more important than this dream he has of being revered by people. Because as he puts it, being famous is the closest he's ever going to come to actually being a king like he wants to be. But in the end, he recognizes that it isn't worth taking advantage of her and ruining their friendship to achieve that. And that's way more powerful than just a generic "don't use your friends" message. Seeing him literally temper one of his dreams because he values his friendship more is very powerful. I also just have to shout out this show's specific brand of humor again. I don't do that a lot in these reviews anymore because I've done it so many times at this point. But like little subtle details, like the fact that, again, in keeping with the whole, we're kind of poking fun at literary tropes thing, them getting out of their situation by what's basically a deus ex machina. And then, like, as they're leaving the room where they were facing down the villain, Lou's like, I don't know why this stood out to me specifically, but this stood out to me specifically. Lou squeezes between the evil publisher character. There's an evil publisher character in this, guys. She squeezes between his two bodyguards and, like, almost gets tripped up when she has to, like, literally squish herself between their elbows. It was just a little bit of attention to detail that didn't need to be there and added so much extra physicality to the scene. And there's even the implication that they might have even broken this toxic cycle by the end, because they end up freeing all of this publisher's past authors who he had imprisoned as small cubes in a briefcase, which was definitely not so terrifying that I'm going to have nightmares about it. And then the next book he plans to publish, like, actually moves him, implying that maybe he might have grown a frickin' heart, and now he won't be so heartless about everything. Like, it's just an implication, but it's there, you know. It was nice. It felt like this one had a lot to say about a specific industry that these writers are literally part of, and also, you know, an extension of it, that being published literary work, right? To the point that if I had the time and the knowledge to really break it down, I could probably make a whole video about it. And yet it never felt boring or inaccessible, and the humor was really strong. This was one of the funniest A-plots we've gotten in quite a long time in this show. And that's saying something, because this show is generally pretty funny. I even liked... It came out of nowhere. I have no idea why this character was here or how they thought of it, but I even liked the typewriter that Luz and King were using was like a creature that could talk to them and would just, like, say lines randomly sometimes. You'd forget he was there, and then he'd say something pertinent to the situation, and it'd be hilarious. This is a very good storyline for this show. And a needed one, too. Because King really does need to start learning some lessons and growing as a character, or he's going to continue to be annoying. That said, though, all of this stuff was only really possible because Eda was gone for a couple of days for her B-plot in this episode. She overheard her sister talking to a vendor, buying a map to lead her to some eternal youth flower that Lilith wants to get for Emperor Bellows. So Eda buys another map to the same thing and tries to beat her there so that she can get it for herself first. And while this was an interesting plot in and of itself, and while obviously the guy was scamming them and they're going to have a little confrontation with him at the end, because of course he is, the main appeal of this B-plot was getting to see these two sisters interact more directly in a comparably casual sort of situation, you know, as opposed to them having a literal witches duel in an arena, right? And getting a feel for their dynamic as people. And boy, is it just delightful. These two together are fantastic. They're straight up, I could watch an entire show that was just them. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. It's really remarkable how much these two feel like siblings when they're together. They have clearly defined characters in general, and you still see glimpses of those characters, of those people there in their day lives when they're interacting as siblings, and yet on top of that you see them behaving like siblings. Like, you know how it is, you get together with your own siblings after having not seen them for a while, and you kind of feel like a different person. You feel a little reinvigorated, like you've gone back in time a little bit, and you're reliving some of those dynamics that you grew up with. It comes from having a level of comfort with these people that you can't really have with anybody else. So seeing Eda playfully trying to beat her sister to this thing, more to beat her sister than anything else. And then in the end, seeing how casually they defeat this threat to them, this menacing vendor character. And the little side eyes they give each other while he's giving his big villain speech. It was riotously funny and also endearing and charming. And I want to see so much more of this dynamic, which is a good thing because according to the season 1 finale, we're apparently going to be seeing much more of this dynamic going forward. Even the end of their specific plot, where Lilith explains that she's not going to try to capture Eda today, because she wants to give Eda one last chance to join the Emperor's Coven willingly, even making the offer that Bellows will cure her curse if she does, and she specifically appeals to Eda, saying she wants the two of them to work together. She wants them to be part of this coven together. And then when Eda rejects her again, even saying that she'll cure the curse on her own terms, the playful way in which they part company but still reaffirm that their dynamic is going to remain the same in just general life. In that moment, I kind of imagined a more traditional Saturday morning cartoon style version of this show, where Eda is an older witch training a young apprentice, and the main conflict of the show doesn't come from some shady, menacing emperor character, but from Eda and Lilith competing with each other, because Lilith wants Eda to join this coven. Like, there's no real consequences for her not joining it. It's just that she's being stubborn by not doing it. And while there is some tension between the characters, it's far less threatening. It's far more casual. Like an Ash and Team Rocket kind of thing, but less antagonistic than that. Something that never amounts to real danger, but still provides conflict to the story, and would have allowed for this kind of dynamic between these sisters to be a recurring thing in the show from the very start. And that's not to say that that version of the show would be better than this. I don't think it would be. The menace of Emperor Bellows, and the fact that it was pretty obvious that there was going to be some menace surrounding him from the moment we knew he existed, is one of the most interesting things about the show. I'm just saying that imagined version of this show, I think, would still work. And I think that speaks very strongly to how strong the dynamic between these two characters is. Especially considering that my memory of this episode wasn't great to begin with. Revisiting it was really fun, and has gotten me looking forward to Season 2 more so than I already was, which I didn't think was possible, but there you go. All of that said, though, like most episodes of this show, this almost felt like 2 episodes in one, but not at all in a bad way. I guess if I had anything to nitpick about, my one complaint would be that I kind of wish, like, thematically or plot-wise, these two plots had had anything to do with each other, and they just don't. But then again, if they had had something to do with each other, we wouldn't have gotten the gag at the very end, where Eda shows back up at home having no idea what went on with King and Luz, and then finding King's book and being profoundly surprised, which was very funny. Which means, I guess my point is that even in an episode where the A and B plots do not intersect at all, this show is still really, really good. As per usual, though, I'd like to know what you guys think of Sense and Insensitivity if you have seen it. Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video and share it with anyone else you think would enjoy my content. Subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out my social medias. Links to those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.